what did you think of this choice of music for the In Memoriam segment at the Oscars?
Play it again, just like you've done it before. Real sweet.
Because much to my surprise, a lot of you hated it. You thought it was too dramatic. You thought it was even insincere. Now, this shocked me, and I had to sit and really think about why so many of you felt that way, but I think I figured it out. And while you have a point, I am here to make an argument that you are wrong, and that in fact, it was a fantastic choice. Call me a prisoner to the hegemony if you must. Lock me up, officers. But I'm here to say it was the right choice. Let's talk about the reaction online. Now, as the Oscars were happening, I sat up in my seat. Oh my God, they're playing Requiem, and this is a religious song, and they're using it right. And I was so happy because I love sacred choral music, and I have sung this in a choir, in a church in Paris. It is so near and dear to my heart. Also, I feel uniquely qualified here because I am a mourner. I lost my mom a little over a year ago, and I'm still in deep grief. And to me, it resonated. But many of you felt a lot more like this nice young man. I think he's so hilarious, so please do not take this as any form of hate. More of you are probably going to agree with him than you'll get any value out of this video, to be fair. There are so many things to discuss here to lay the groundwork, okay? So first of all, why am I talking about this? Because everything is that deep to me. And I actually did happen to go to grad school for this stuff. There's my degree. It's in something called Comp Lit. That means we read culture. That's what we did. We read culture. First, let's talk about the purpose of an In Memoriam at the Oscars, because this even divided people, it seems. A lot of people wanted this segment to be more uplifting, more of a in remembrance vibe, more of a celebrating their work vibe, not like sinners dangling over the pit of hell vibe. Now, I would argue that Lacrimosa is not sinners dangling over the pit of hell vibe. It is dramatic, but it is, in fact, Lacrimosa. It is a sadder song in Mozart's Requiem than, say, Dies Irae. Now that is high drama. That is Judgment Day is here, folks. Pack it up. Pack it up. But Lacrimosa has all these slower moments, all these builds. And in its short 3 minutes, Lacrimosa gives us moments like this. Maybe more of a resolution, an acceptance, a pensive moment. Maybe something you guys are kind of asking for. It's already there. And what is an In Memoriam segment for anyway, if not for us to create space for reflection on our mortality, right? Even if the music was more buoyant and light, are we not still going to sit there and have a sad moment and think about the mysteries of life and death? Is it not still heavy? Maybe it's because I am in a season of very fresh grief, but for me, this is it. Death is dramatic. It doesn't get more dramatic than death. We run away from death. We run away from sad feelings in our culture. But guess what? This is the saddest one. Grief is wrenching. Grief is deep. If Gene Hackman were my dad, I would want people to feel something when they saw his picture. I would want the music to create an emotional reaction for them. I want tears. I want drama. To me, it feels false to have something light and poppy. I want something heavy, the most solemn, the most evocative. Something that's like, how is this our human condition? How is this it? Another critique I saw was that it's a religious piece. People were even posting the Latin lyrics and their translation as if to say, look at this crazy religious stuff about the guilty being judged. This is so inappropriate. And yes, if you're not familiar with the high drama of Catholicism, of the pomp and circumstance, it might sound like a lot, but actually it's just a way of saying rest in peace. It's like RIP. R.I.P. Okay? That's literally what Lacrimosa is. It's saying rest in peace. It's a plea to God, give their souls eternal rest. But it's sad. It's evocative of the anguish that we have wondering where our loved ones go. And in the old days, they might have wondered more about heaven versus hell, but we wonder more, just frankly, where are you? That comes across here. Modern audiences also struggle with an idea like Judgment Day, but it's not that unfamiliar actually. You can just think of it as like our actions have consequences. That's pretty universal amongst every religion. In Buddhism, it's karma. In Judaism, it's measure for measure. In Christianity, it's you reap what you sow. In Islam and Christianity, it's Judgment Day. Our actions have consequences. It's not like, you're all sinners and you're all going to hell. That's not what this song is about. Okay? It's rest in peace. God, please bring my person into eternal rest. That's what it is. Let's move on to the quote that really set me off, if I'm being honest. I'm well aware of its significance, but tonally it's rung for an in memoriam. Lacrimosa now means something different and feels insincere when played in this context. Now this really threw me because my first thought was, do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist.
You exist
in the context of all in which you live and all that came before you. Lacrimosa did not fall out of a coconut tree. Lacrimosa was not created for memes. Lacrimosa is only funny in memes because of its original context. Any kind of ironic use of Lacrimosa only is effective because we understand how serious it is. Like, there's no up without down. There's no light without dark. There's no that being funny unless we understand the seriousness, the gravity of it. So inherent in the critique that it's used only for funny as a signifier of drama, baked into the irony, is its inherent seriousness. And what is more serious than death? There is no ha-ha without death. Have you ever heard about how comedy is tragedy plus time? Well, what says that better than Lacrimosa becoming a hilarious soundtrack of funny memes? Like, that's it. All right. Now, let me take you seriously here, because most of you are probably going to agree with that person. I don't know. Maybe it's 50-50, but it seems like the younger you are, the more you thought that Lacrimosa did not work. That's my theory. To many of you, you've heard Lacrimosa used in these funny ways so often that perhaps it has become a shorthand for fake drama. Also, younger audiences are very cynical towards emotional manipulation. You've grown up in a world where people are constantly trying to make you feel a certain way and do a certain thing, and you're very media literate and you're very aware of being manipulated. So if you see a musical piece being used as shorthand to feel sad, you're maybe not buying it. Maybe you see that as manipulative or forced. And that's why it makes a lot of sense that modern storytelling leads more towards subtlety and authenticity, restraint, ambiguity, realism, etc. Maybe you would have preferred something subdued, naturalistic, even a moment of silence. Many of you also, as I said earlier, do not feel any connection to the religious context of a requiem mass. A high Catholic requiem mass is going over pretty much all of our heads at this point, right? To be fair. We also are all skeptical of institutionalized tributes. Something like the Oscars inherently were like, is this real? Come on. There might never be a way for the Oscars to do something that feels sincere to a 20-year-old in 2025. I don't know. Location change. We have a new set. My 3-year-old came home. We are now entering the academic portion of our video, and this part is extremely choppy because I was trying to hold to not record the sounds of my son screaming in the background. I've tried to edit out the pauses, and all in all, the effect is incredibly choppy and weird, and I promise I will not do this next time, but sorry. Let's engage seriously with the argument that Lacrimosa was the wrong choice. Let's look at the instability of meaning from a post-structural context. The structuralist model put forth by Saussure suggests that Lacrimosa signifies grief, but a post-structural thinker like Derrida would challenge the idea of fixed meaning. His concept of différence argues that meaning is always shifting based on context, reception, and cultural play. While Lacrimosa historically conveyed mourning, its contemporary use in films, memes, EDM remixes.
That was Mozart.
And ironic juxtapositions complicates its meaning. The assumption that it naturally retains sincerity is therefore flawed, as meaning is socially constructed rather than inherent. Let's talk about Baudrillard and loss of authenticity. Baudrillard's concept of simulacra, repeated representations, become detached from authentic experiences. Thus, if Lacrimosa is overused in the media, it risks becoming a simulation of grief rather than an expression of it. That is really kind of what's happening here. Audiences engage not with genuine mourning, but with the media shorthand for sorrow. Critiques of this in memoriam segment might recognize this phenomenon, seeing Lacrimosa as a formulaic aesthetic rather than a deeply felt act of remembrance. Let's talk cultural anthropology and ritual, the shifting function of mourning practices. Anthropologists like Victor Turner and Clifford Geertz emphasize that rituals remain powerful only when they evolve with cultural context. Turner's concept of liminality describes rituals as transitions, but their impact depends on their relevance to their participants. Lacrimosa once held deep significance, but its transformation into a media cue may strip it of its power. Critics are not rejecting mourning traditions, they're seeking more personal ones. Let's look at Stuart Hall's encoding-decoding model and audience reception. Stuart Hall's encoding-decoding model explains how audiences actively interpret cultural symbols. Lacrimosa is not universally received as a symbol of grief. Instead, audiences may take different stances. The first, which is the point I'm arguing, is the dominant hegemonic view, accepting Lacrimosa as a timeless, universal symbol of grief. Others will take a negotiated stance. I would say that the video I played earlier, Dave, and perhaps even the commenter I cited earlier, take this negotiated stance. They understand the historical and cultural significance, but would argue that it's overly theatrical in this context today. And some would take an entirely oppositional stance, rejecting it outright as an emotional cliche. So critics are operating from that negotiated or oppositional stance here, not from a place of ignorance. Critics could also make a psychological argument about overexposure. Richard Lazarus's appraisal theory suggests that repeated exposure to emotional stimuli can lead to desensitization. If audiences frequently hear Lacrimosa in various media, films, memes, commercials, viral videos, etc., its emotional impact may diminish. Critics are not disregarding its significance, but experiencing habituation, where a once powerful stimulus loses its potency due to overuse. So this is a legitimate cultural critique. Rather than operating from a place of ignorance or lack of understanding of context, critics of the use of Lacrimosa are engaging in a valid critique grounded in post-structuralist theory, media studies, anthropology, and psychology. They recognize that meaning is fluid, overuse can weaken emotional power, and mourning rituals must evolve to remain impactful. This critique reflects a broader cultural shift, not a misunderstanding of tradition. Okay, that's me being really nice. That is me being as generous as possible, okay? And I'm going to argue that that's still wrong. I'm going to offer a rebuttal on the enduring power of Lacrimosa. The claim that Lacrimosa has lost its sincerity due to overuse relies on flawed assumptions about meaning, ritual, and emotional reception. By examining structuralist anthropology, media theory, and music psychology, we see that grief symbols maintain stability, that they actually strengthen over time and with repeated use, that musical emotion transcends cultural saturation. Post-structuralist skepticism suggests that meaning is unstable, but not all symbols are equally fluid. Anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss argues that cultural symbols that are tied to fundamental human experiences, such as mourning, retain significance over time. Grief requires recognizable forms of expression. Ritualistic reinforcement strengthens meaning rather than weakens it. It would also argue that if repetition caused exhaustion, mourning symbols like black attire or funeral processions or burials would hold no meaning by now, and that's demonstrably false. Let's talk about Baudrillard and the simulacra. Remember that simulacra refers to something that has been detached from real-world meaning. But Lacrimosa does not actually fit this model. Unlike commodified imagery, funeral music is directly linked to mourning traditions. Not all representations are hyper-real. Not everything has lost connection to a real thing. Death is a real thing. Mourning and grieving rituals are very real. If repetition erased all meaning, all enduring mourning practices would be hollow, which is patently false. And another thing, the claim that overuse renders Lacrimosa ineffective operates on the assumption that novelty must be at the core of authenticity. And again, we know that that's just not true. Public mourning does not require innovation. It relies on continuity. Just as religious and cultural practices persist over the generations, so does Lacrimosa. The expectation that sincerity demands uniqueness and novelty is a very modern, hyper-individualistic, Western, and capitalist notion. That is a hyper-individualistic bias that completely ignores the need for age-old communal traditions. Far from making it stale, Lacrimosa's predictability affirms its cultural legitimacy. Okay, so let's go back to Stuart Hall. While the encoding and decoding model explains how audiences interpret media, not all meanings are infinitely malleable. Musical mourning traditions carry a historical weight that you simply cannot redefine or ignore. Hall's theory is much more useful for ambiguous, politically charged media, propaganda, government output, etc., and much less useful for something as universally significant as grief and mourning. Individual rejection of Lacrimosa also does not negate its communal weight. Individual rejection of Lacrimosa does not erase its dominant meaning. We could also make the argument that Leonard Meyer and Patrick Joslin make about the psychological effect of music and how the harmonic tension and cadence evokes solemnity and loss. Therefore, music is not just creating space for the emotional processing of grief, it's actually creating grief and mourning in and of itself. It's creating participation in this deeper human experience. So if desensitization were absolute, universally recognized pieces, Amazing Grace or Taps, Adagio for Strings, or this one, would lose their power. And they clearly have not. In conclusion, certain symbols defy. Certain symbols transcend space and time. Lacrimosa remains an active mourning process. Therefore, it is not hyper-real. It is not a simulacrum. Ritual's power comes from repetition, not reinvention. Audience interpretation is not infinitely flexible. Certain meanings do persist. Thus, the rejection of Lacrimosa as an insincere choice for memorialization is not an insightful critique of media saturation. Rather, it is a fundamentally flawed misunderstanding of how culture, ritual, and emotion function. Rather than seeing its continued use as a sign of emptiness, one must recognize that its endurance is precisely what makes it so meaningful. And that's my 2 cents. What do you think? Own me in the comments. Was this a self-own? I don't know. Offer your rebuttal below. Thank you. Thank you for watching. And of course, since I'm just starting out this channel, I forgot to record an intro and an outro. Impressive, no? This level of forgetful? Yes. Well, if you liked it and you like talking about pop culture and random internet phenomena, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to like this video. And if you have anything you want me to talk about through a vaguely academic or not so academic lens, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I would love to hear what you want to talk about. Thanks for watching. Take care.